Thanks for tuning in to Written on the Edge, Season 7, Episode 44. I'm Van Sebastian, here with my co-host, S.A. Baz Collins.
Howdy, howdy.
We're really glad you're here with us. Today's episode is going to be a bit special because we're reviewing a docu-series, which is going to take us a bit longer, I think. So we also had a guest had to bail because of Halloween festivities.
Gay Christmas.
Gay Christmas. What are we going to do? What are you going to do about stuff like that? You know what I'm saying? So stay tuned because Baz and I have a couple of things to share with you before we dive into the review, and then we will share what won our week and who our attention's being held by. So
before we move on, though, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
In considering, and just I'm going to show this to the people out in the world because this is how my brain works. So here's all my scribbles of my notes. I just grabbed a receipt from a pair of shoes I bought online. I just started writing my notes on it. That's how my brain works. Anyways, I wrote down a ton of films that we obviously didn't get to because we only did 4 episodes in the month of October. So I kind of want, since we're going to be talking about Queer for Fear, the history of queer in cinema, I kind of started writing down horror movies that have queer themes in them or queer characters in them so that, you know, I could bring out some of the things we didn't get to. I mean, obviously there's a ton out there. But I just kind of wanted to ask and pitch it your way. And I think it's something we should get Michael's opinion on as well. In writing this list, I got to a point where I thought, well, wait a minute. Is queer horror, does it encompass like serial killings that involve queer people? Does it involve exposure in a harsh situation where the horror is you're just trying to survive and be not noticed? I started opening up that thought thinking, okay, for queer people, we have horrors that exist in our everyday lives that don't necessarily translate to our straight counterparts. So my question when I was writing this list out, I'm thinking, okay, but then like there are movies and series where, and one that comes to mind right off the top of my head is Rites of Passage, which is a 1990s film, and it deals with a father and son who are trying to reconnect in a camping trip at a cabin out in the wilderness, and they're visited by 2 prisoners who have escaped from a prison, and you find out they have a connection to the father and son in a really strange way, and sexual tensions mount because of this situation, and it starts to explode and becomes more horrific as the night wears on. And I couldn't help but think that it's possible that that could be part of the horror genre for queer people. What do you think?
A lot of exposition. I think horror is a super broad, almost useless category that has the connotation of really difficult to watch because it is not something you want in your life. And stop. So whenever I talk to people about horror, I try to include a subgenre so they understand. So camp slasher, supernatural, monster, vampire. I will, if I know the monster, I'll say vampire, werewolf, thriller, psychological thriller. I mean, those all fall under horror because these are elements or actions or events that you do not want happening in your life. And I think that's how I define horror. That's how I define horror when I'm speaking to someone, so that I force myself to give a subgenre and explain what element of horror I'm talking about. So to answer your larger question, yeah, I mean, sometimes the stuff that we, queer folks go
As
through
queer people
is extremely horrific. I know we haven't dived into the review yet, but there was one actor in part 4 of this docuseries who talked about actually having been in a conversion camp. That's horrible.
Right, which is why them, our very first review. That's why that's kind of what started it all. I'm like, but wait a minute, there are other films that are out there that would have horrific meanings for the queer community that aren't necessarily, that have those kinds of meanings in those situations,
Mm-hmm.
So something I think we ought to kind of broach Michael about, and we'll do that when we get to our review section.
All right.
Hey, gals, gays, and days, welcome back. And we're here for our final review of the unholy trio that is Michael, Vance, and myself. Sorry, I'm just keeping with the theme. I'm just staying.
No, I'm into it.
I thought you were going to say the final review of Horror Month.
Yeah, our horror month. You can say horror. I'm a horror. Anyways. I was sitting here thinking about, because all the movies we couldn't get to, obviously there's a ton of them out there that have queer, characters or queer storylines that are woven into the horror itself. And I started just writing them down. In the process of writing them down on my goofy ass receipt that I scribbled this stuff on, I began to realize that there's a segment of this. I mean, and the one that in the pre-show that I cited for Vance was a movie called Rites of Passage, which is a late 90s movie that dealt with convicts who escaped from prison. And it's a father and son trying to reconnect. And even though the son's obviously queer and there's something going on that they have to sort out. And then these guys show up who happen to know the father and the son, but the father doesn't know that the son knows them. And how does he know them? And so all of this stuff starts to evolve over this night in this cabin out in the woods. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, but queer people have our own level of horror that can visit us that has nothing to do with like a supernatural situation or, that there are things that the queer community fears as a community collectively. And I started to ask myself, well, then how many movies would there be that would fall under that category, like Rites of Passage or At Pupils, another one I thought of. Then we get into things like Gods and Monsters, which was James Whale's experience and what he went through, and it had its own horror tied to it. Then you've got the comedy weirdness, that Psycho Beach Party. You have all these queer comedy throwbacks of these very famous slasher kind of movies and stuff. And I was just kind of thinking of the broader term. So how do you feel about, how do either one of you really feel about what horror subgenres mean for the queer community, other than the standard monster kind of thing?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure how to answer that because... Oh, yeah, go ahead, Michael, because I'm still trying to...
I didn't want to jump in, but I wholeheartedly agree. I think that there are things that we as queer people find horrifying that other people don't. And that means that stories that are horror stories for us are not always horror stories for other people. And there are things that in a movie would frighten us, or at the very least, make us very uneasy. Things that would be very tense for us to watch, are things that people who are not queer just kind of take for granted as part of the human experience. I mean, imagine a remake of Rosemary's Baby in which Rosemary is also a queer woman who didn't want children. The idea of parenthood, to some degree, to a lot of us, is kind of terrifying. It's so outside of our idea of ourselves. That doesn't mean that there are no queer parents, but it means that a lot of queer people don't really see that as part of their story of themselves. And so that idea of an unexpected pregnancy, that I can't imagine how people handle that. The idea that they're tied into a commitment to another human being for 18 years and they didn't plan this, that just blows my mind. It would be very easy for me to turn that into a horror story, whether it's supernatural or not. It would be very easy for me to turn that into somebody whose life is just chock full of things that scare them. you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's not necessarily true in non-queer people's idea of themselves and in their
Right. I think it
experience.
has to be a knife involved or serial killer or supernatural being. Whereas sometimes it's the mainstream community for us that is the most, because the whole metaphor of pitchforks and torches is very real for us. It's just on a human level, just an existence level, you know.
I think for a lot of queer people, the ultimate horror is the world finds out who I am. And for a lot of non-queer people, the ultimate horror is I find out that the people around me are not who I thought they were. And there's some overlap in those concepts, but I think that that's a big, bright line between the queer concept of horror and the non-queer concept of horror.
It's the Venn diagram of all Venn diagrams.
It kind of is. I mean,
and that's where American Horror Story lives. Shout out to Ryan Murphy. Okay, well, that ties in perfectly with our review for this week. We are reviewing Queer for Fear, the history of queer cinema. So, in horror, what did you guys think about it as an overall thing? And did you think there was anything missing from the way that they approached this? Just generally speaking.
Well, I think there are things missing in cinematic history that I would have liked to have seen them cover. I just don't think examples existed. Like, I would have liked to have seen them cover trans works more, but I don't think there are enough of them for them to have covered. So the stuff that I felt was missing, I don't think was on their part in any way an oversight. I think it was just there was a lack of source material. Michael?
I think that I loved it. I loved it from start to finish. One of the very first things that anybody says in it is horror disturbs all the right people. And like the second she said that, I was just like, oh, I'm gonna love the hell out of this. It's gonna be so good. And the entire series is chock full of people making unbelievably insightful observations about horror and like why horror appeals to them, why they saw themselves in horror. And I found it especially poignant to think about and to hear about the people who had only ever seen themselves in horror, and the people who saw themselves as monstrous and thus only ever saw themselves when they saw a monster on the screen. It's like very deeply affecting. The third episode really got to me in that regard. There was just a lot in that episode that was me saying, gosh, there's so much of my own experience that I'm hearing validated here. There are ways of that I have never thought about my own queer experience that this is making me reconsider and giving me new ways to think about my own life. And there's so much to just like learn from this. At one point, we watched all 4 episodes over the course of the week, and I said to my husband at one point, there are stories or documentaries or whatever that are basically queer people explaining to the non-queer world. And then there are things that are queer people talking to queer people.
Right.
And this is queer people talking to queer people. And he said, yeah, exactly. It's okay for the cisheads to watch, but they're not really a part of the conversation in a big way.
Right.
And that itself just kind of feels like home. It's just so nice to feel like we've all got into the same little discussion room and closed the door.
Right.
And we can say what we say.
The ultimate focus group.
Yeah. And also, we were talking about it last night. We were talking about the fact that there are so many actors that we know from things who spoke in Queer for Fear and spoke about their own queerness. And we were like, we had no idea that they were queer. And the fact that this is probably a coming out moment for a lot of them, it just blew my mind. What an unbelievable opportunity for like really great horror actors, people who are parts of franchises that I love. I had no idea that the person who made the Chucky franchise was queer. I had no idea that the lead from Welcome to the Dollhouse, who then shows up in the Scream movies, I had no idea that she was a queer person. I had no idea that one of the women from The Craft was queer. Like all of this just blew my mind. And the fact that I got to like see so much queerness in the things that I love already.
And to know we're represented far beyond what most people think of.
Yeah, totally. In terms of stuff that I think is missing, more recent movies.
Yeah.
They did a good job in the 4th episode of talking about like the experience of women in queer horror, of getting up closer to the modern era. But I really would love to see a 2nd season of this, and I would love for it to focus on stuff made like since say 1980.
Right.
I mean,
right.
they barely dipped into the 90s, and that was it.
Yeah. And, and we have things like They, Them, we have, which we reviewed, and we also have like Bodies. There's things that are happening now where queer is an essential element of the story. And, they didn't really get to that. It's kind of like they had, we had Celluloid Closet, which was Vito Russo's incredible work that was put to film. And then you had, I think it was called, Queer Cinema? It was a documentary about the queerness that burgeoned in the gay 90s. And it's really wonderful because you get that validation. But again, it's like almost when the documentaries are produced, you have excellent in time. But it's kind of, I agree with you, it kind of feels like they could have gone a bit further into the 2000s especially for the children who often only look in the last 10 or 15 years of their life and don't really look back further. That I think that, while this series, I think, opened up doors to a lot of them of, all this stuff is out there that's about us, kind of thing. But then you have, the newer stuff that's out there that they are aware of, and it didn't seem to have a place yet in this. So I think there is definitely a door open for them to take this further. I think it would be great. Now, I do want to balance it against the Book of Queer, which was done by Eric Cervini, the gay historian. And when I watched that series, it was pretty much how queers have been in existence throughout history. And they took several big queer people throughout history and kind of expounded on it. And they did it with tongue firmly planted in cheek kind of queer humor, which I think both added to it, but I think it did more disservice than service to the subject. What I loved about Queer for Fear was its clear vision of how they were going to impart this information and how it is literally a textbook for queers on how to take in this genre of storytelling and realize it has been a part of our community for a long ass time.
Well, and they also presented this entire series through a lens of both intellect and emotion and not campy fun.
Yeah.
Which was huge. I loved that aspect of it because it didn't turn us into a joke.
Right. Exactly. It allowed us to be serious about a topic that means quite a bit to us as a community.
So earnest, I just like, and not in a cheesy bad way, just in a like, it really felt like a homecoming. Like that's a weird thing to say, but like, I think of, I grew up in a big, sprawling, ridiculous Southern family. And I think of like the good elements. One of the good elements of that includes like big family reunions where you get to hear people sit around and tell stories that are really interesting about like their own childhoods or whatever. And it kind of felt like that, it felt like a homecoming where you got to just be with the fam and hear each other say, yeah, I too experienced that. And that just, I could not get enough of that. I would watch another 10 episodes tomorrow.
Yeah. And who would have thought Shudder would have pulled this off?
They make really great stuff. And they
I know, but I didn't expect this.
Horror noir. They made the documentary series about the Black experience in horror, and really, really, they're like primo. I would not have guessed 5 years ago that was going to be the case.
Right.
But they make the best stuff.
Yeah, really incredible. I was really floored by the quality of what they put forth, and the fact that they went to Brian Fuller to produce this, and one of our own to really lend a hand and say, okay, this is how I think if we're going to do this and do it right, we need to really dedicate ourselves to telling it from a perspective. And I agree with you, Michael. It was literally queers for queers. And it's the old Harvey Firestein. It's great if straight people can watch it and get something from it, but it's not for you, kind of thing, And that was really kind of a wonderful feeling of something created for us. by us and in a large medium like a streaming channel. So kudos to them for that.
That said, I want to see every university put this in their cinema courses.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
It could be its own course by itself.
It could, but I would like it to at least be a chapter.
Yeah. So SFSU, who has a really great queer studies program and a certificate program at that, start adding this. They already do gay porn as a course. I'm serious. Only San Francisco could pull that off.
Yeah.
Okay,
wow.
I had a friend of mine who
It's
took
hard
the
to
course.
imagine any of the universities in the UNC system doing that.
I have to tell you, when a friend of mine told me that, she said that, I took the queer studies program, the certificate program at SFSU. And she goes, it was really fascinating. And the gay porn class, like, I was like, oh, come and get what? I'm like, holy San Francisco. The black sheep of America.
Yep.
But anyways, I just want to give people a quick shout out. These are some of the things I jotted down that I thought were definitely highlights of queer films or with queer storylines or queer characters in the stories. And this is just a quick runoff. I have Babadook, Bite Marks, which has Stephen Jeffries from Fright Night fame. Dragula, Cabin in the Woods, The Covenant, The Craft, Cursed, Devil's Advocate, Fear Street, the 1 through 3 series, but it's Ryan Murphy. Fright Night, because the whole Ed thing kind of had this queer element to that character. So, and then I always thought, and actually when I saw it, I kind of was rewatching it, and the whole sequence between Roddy McDowall and Ed, Evil, it was kind of a weird younger gay versus older gay kind of moment that I never really took in that way until I rewatched it after watching Queer for Fear. And I kind of saw it in that light. And I'm like, this is kind of interesting. If you take it in that way between the two characters, it's like, and then at the end when Evil dies, and I hope I'm not spoiling it for too many people, it's been out since 85, kids. But when Evil dies, you kind of see the sadness in Peter Vincent, that this young queer youth, this young outsider, has this horrific end, and he was part of it, and it's kind of the sadness that you see in Roddy McDowall's eyes. I think Roddy put it there purposefully because he could kind of see what this meant for queer people, so I don't know. I found that really fascinating that I had never seen it in that light, and I've watched that movie 8 billion times, and I never really caught that element until after watching Queer for Fear. So that's a good thing to say about that series, that docu-series. So, those were just some of my examples. There are tons more. I'll put them down in the description of the ones that I could think of that I found. Definitely in the comments, if you people have suggestions of queer horror films, definitely add to the list, because we would love to have a working list here of things that we can hit up next year. So with that, how about our ratings? Michael?
I'm going to give production quality a 5. They did so much with so little. The entire set is a chair, a red light, and whatever unbelievable outfits somebody was willing to wear. Seeing Ben Delacreme show up as like Daisy Duke Werewolf, I don't know. I wanted to just like clap and scream and cry all at once. Script, screenplay, it was, I don't know how much of it was like scripted. I don't know. But the fact that the observations in it were like deeply intimate and also very accessible to other queer people, and really moved me at times and really entertained me at times, I'm going to give it a 5. What people said was real smart. Sound, lighting, score. The music for it was phenomenally good. So 5. Art direction and costuming. Is there anything better than that suit that Brian Fuller keeps wearing in that show? I was like, Brian Fuller has never really been my type, and all of a sudden, he's my type.
Yeah, Betty.
So, and plus a bunch of drag queens doing unbelievably great drag. I'll never get over that. Casting, they drew on so many people who had such incredibly intelligent things to say. I'm going to get my tongue untied. And it just really, really drew on the queer community in fascinating ways. Directing, they got out of the way and let people talk. So I'm going to give both casting and directing a 5. Queer themes presented, I mean, I know it's a scale of 1 to 5 and I keep violating it, but let's say like 500. I mean, like, all they did was talk about the queer experience. This was so good. This was so affirming. Personal overall rating, easy 5. Couldn't beat it. I would watch this again in a heartbeat. And I don't often say that about documentaries, but I would watch it again in a heartbeat. I love documentaries, but once you've watched it, you've watched it.
Right.
And this was phenomenal. There will be more stuff in this for me to recognize and realize the next time I watch it.
Especially, with you being a writer of that genre, it's like there's tons of stuff to pull there,
Right.
Yeah. I'm sitting there writing down stuff that I need to go watch again.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Beth?
Mine also 5s across the board for almost identical reasons in every way. I don't think I even had a deviation other than to say my personal overall is a 5 because it's something I would recommend to others, including straight couples.
Yeah. Mine are, I'm going to pull the Oprah. You get a 5 and you get a 5 and you get a 5. It's 5s across the board, kids. I mean, it's a phenomenal documentary. So just even from a documentary standpoint,
right?
The fact that they pulled all those people, the fact that they all wanted to be willing participants, and the absolute connection they had to the subject matter. That was the thing that I loved about it most, was that every person that was on, that was talking, was interviewing, had a passion for the subject.
Yes.
And it wasn't, nobody phoned it in. Nobody.
Right.
It was all, everybody wanted to have their thoughtful comment about whatever the subtopic was that they were discussing. They had an element ready, to put out there. And it really does give you a lot to think about. There's tons of mental flaws in this whole thing. So definite 5s across the board for me.
All right. Michael, do you want to stick around and share who won your week and what you're on about?
Sure. Absolutely.
Awesome. So, Baz, do you want to start us off so Michael has a clue as to what we're doing?
Yeah, okay.
I was going to say, I would appreciate instructions or an example.
We'll go first.
Yeah, we'll go first. So what am I on about this week? So I have in my goofy ass notes again, down along the bottom, a couple things that were really kind of cool, and a couple that weren't. So I'm going to give the first 2 that I think are cool. I started watching The Winchesters, which is the prequel to Supernatural. There's a fabulous queer Latino character with long hair who I swear to God at some point he's going to pull the Cher move and do that. I'm just waiting for it. But the character's name is Carlos. He's played by a great Latino actor. I'm here for it. There are elements of him being a slightly too modern for the 70s, for the early 70s, but they've got all the pop culture references down. They cite the right rock stars and people of that era. So there's nothing of that lost, but there's just a couple of times when the Carlos character creeps into something that's a little more modern, having been someone who grew up in that era. I don't remember that being a thing then. So I'm on about the Winchesters. Definitely check it out. The writing is not as tight as Supernatural, but I expect it's going to get better and better and better. And there seems to be a breadth of sexuality floating through the series. So it's not just gay, straight, or whatever. In fact, Carlos is rather ambiguous, but it's clear he has an attraction to both John, the father of the boys from the Winchester, so John Winchester, as well as Mary. He had a past with Mary, that they dated for a while. So it's very, very open. There's also a new series that I want to check out called The Bastard Son and the Devil Himself, which evidently deals with supernatural, and it's a kind of pseudo horror story, and it deals with the throuple, 2 men and a woman. And it seems like it'd be very, very interesting. There are talk and write-ups of it are really positive. So definitely check that out. The downside things that I'm kind of following is we gained Super Sleuth in that Benoit Blanc is officially queer for the Knives Out series. So, and I saw somebody who went to TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, and they got to see Glass Onion, the new Knives Out, and they said it's just as fun as the first one was. So it's got the same level push to it, and Daniel Craig is there in all his Benoit Blanc glory. So wonderful that we have a really queer super sleuth along the lines of a Foghorn Leghorn sounding Sherlock Holmes. Green Lantern, unfortunately, got canned, sort of. They're going to still do a series, but Greg Berlanti and Seth Graham-Green have exited the project, and that was the project that had a queer Green Lantern, one of the first Green Lanterns. I think his name was Adam Scott. Isn't Adam Scott his name, Vance? I think that's the character's name. He was the old-fashioned one with the...
I didn't read the Justice Society, but he was,
he was the original kind of right. Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And so he was supposed to be an openly gay man, and they had it cast. Everything was going along. They had 8 episodes written already in the can, and now it's been pulled, and they're going to redo the whole thing. So we lost a gay character there that could have been kind of cool. I'm also down a bit about Anton Krasorsky, and if for people who don't know who he is an openly gay man who was a queer activist in Russia. He came out in 2013 when they were first proposing the LGBT propaganda stuff, and he actually outed himself on camera, on RT. He was at the point, he was the chief editor-in-chief of RT, which is Russia Today. So in making that step, it was very controversial when he announced that he was a gay man. And he was running one of the biggest propaganda arms of the Russian government. He went on a tirade this past week where he said that Russia needed to start ethnically cleansing Ukraine for Russians, and they could start by drowning children in the Dnieper River. Not something that gay people want to be associated with. So, yeah. So he got fired from his job, and it's bad if the Kremlin goes, you know what, you've reached the limit.
You are too extreme for us. Get out.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm on about this week. What about you, Vance?
I'm going to start with my sad first. We lost Leslie Jordan. That broke my heart. He was such a bright point of light, and just getting stronger, even through the pandemic with his own, YouTube channel and the social stuff he was doing. He was just front and center and unabashedly himself, and truly a hero. So that's my sad. My happy, I think I'm doing this in reverse of you, is political. Wisconsin is a boring state that nobody cares about, yet Barack Obama came here to help our governor campaign, and he specifically hit Milwaukee, which is right now notoriously purple. Hugely important, very appreciated, and I was awfully glad to see him, step aside from his podcast for a minute and come help another brother out. So
evidently, he also did something in Georgia just recently that's now hitting everything, where a heckler came in and he shut the guy down. I'm like, bravo, Mr. President.
Yep. My third thing is entertainment, and it ties into some stuff we've been talking about a lot here lately. The movie 355, which got poor ratings, but my husband and I both wanted to see it. It's about 4 women who are espionage agents, but Jessica Chastain plays the American, and in the opening monologue, she talks about an original female agent working for George Washington, known only as Agent 355. These 4 women from 4 different countries had no reason to like each other. They had every reason to hate each other because they're working at cross purposes to, big global explosion kind of thing. But they not only found commonality through their hardships, they developed a trusting friendship and solved the world's crisis. And I'm not going to spoil anything more beyond that. A 5th woman does enter into it and eventually also earns the trust and friendship, and she's a Chinese agent. So the subtext of again, and we've talked about this before, films that are starting to show women as supporting each other as opposed to going at each other.
Right.
This is a beautiful example of that, because these women had professional reasons to shoot each other, and it went the other direction. So I was very pleasantly surprised by this film in every way. It is violent. There's fighting, there's gunshot, there's blood. I mean, all of that's in there. So trigger warnings for those of you who don't appreciate that. But if you can look past that and see the storyline of the friendship that develops, it was a powerful, powerful film.
Bravo.
Michael?
Does that mean I should go?
Yes.
If
All
you
right.
can think of something. I know we're putting you on the spot.
No, it's all good. So my sad, I'm going to have to think about. I had a sad just a second ago, and then okay, this will do as my sad. My sad is that what I have read is that unofficially Disney is not sure whether they're going to make more She-Hulk. And I love She-Hulk. She-Hulk is one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. The Dan Slott era of writing of She-Hulk is phenomenally good. It's like fun, it's meta, it's exciting, it's energetic, it's beautifully drawn, it's a really clever set of storylines. And the TV show did, in my opinion, a really phenomenal job of like capturing a lot of the feel of the Dan Slott run on She-Hulk, where it's meta, you know, she breaks the fourth wall, she does all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Yep.
And it includes some of the storyline elements from that era, but it's also very creative and it's very original and it's part of the larger universe and includes great queer character. And She-Hulk herself is obviously a queer icon. I mean, she's like a 9-foot tall woman who feels different from the rest of the world.
Right.
Gays are going to love her. So, I would be very sad if that turned out to be true. My sad was going to be Leslie Jordan, but that's,
sorry.
I feel you on that one. My happy is totally unrelated to anything queer, but very horror. We watched VHS 94, which is another Shudder original, actually. And they ditched the really bad VHS viral movie. Basically, they said, no, let's go back to doing the original idea. Let's do a little anthology of horror stories that are sort of wrapped up with a wraparound story. And it feels amazing to just watch it be another VHS movie and be like, I get to go back and have that VHS experience again. And it's beautifully done. 4 really well done, ultimately cosmic horror stories. It's hard to get well done cosmic horror that doesn't beat you over the head with the fact that it's cosmic horror from the get-go. I wholeheartedly agree with what you were saying earlier about needing to have multiple ways to talk about horror and subgenres. And cosmic horror is one of my faves. And seeing VHS, the original VHS movies were very much about kind of shock and gore and a lot of jump scares and really weird situations. And seeing them go back to that where it's shocking and gory and weird and also ultimately cosmic horror more than anything. Oh, so well done. Just gorgeous. Loved VHS 94. I know it's not brand new, but I had not seen it yet. We watched it last night and had just a phenomenal time watching it. Just so delighted by that. So highly recommended. Yet again, I'm going to get out here and rep Shudder. I'm not getting paid anything by Shudder. If they wanted to pay me, I would be happy.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But,
we'll cash the check.
We'll keep talking nice about. We will keep talking nice about you if you want to pay us.
Yeah, totally. But for free, I'll just say they're making really great stuff, and I look forward to seeing VHS 99. After VHS Viral, I had kind of written off the franchise and said I'm not really interested in the rest of this. And no, VHS 94 totally restored my interest in that franchise.
Excellent,
Nice.
Excellent. All right, so who won your week?
I should probably go first again. So the concept behind Who Won Your Week, it was the news story that just made you sit up and take notice. Good, bad, and different, but it certainly was the biggest one that caught you this week. So in the spirit of sharing an example, I'll go first. The Wilder Bleen Project in Canterbury, England, announced the birth of the first buffalo/bison to be born on British soil in thousands of years.
Wow.
They have been hunted to extinction. This project brought some over from the U.S. to try to reintroduce them, but in a controlled, contained large subset of fields.
So they aren't charging down in front of Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, right. They aren't charging through the British countryside, at least not yet. But what they did not realize was one of the females was pregnant when she came over. So little baby girl Bison was born in England this last week.
Yay.
For the first time in recorded history. I mean, I think they said it was like almost 6,000 years since one had been born there.
Wow.
Damn.
Yeah. So that was the winner of my week, was hearing that going, bah!
Right. Okay. Well, mine is the entire country of Mexico, because gay marriage is now legal in the entire country of Mexico. So well done, mi fellow Latinos. So that's who won my week. Michael?
I think for my week, it's going to be what seems to be renewed vigor in Democratic campaigning, and especially with Obama doing rallies. I know that we've already mentioned this, but it was very high on my, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that he went to Georgia, that he did a big rally, and that the Republican attempt to do a big rally in Georgia was to send Lindsey Graham. And I don't know what to tell them.
Lady Lindsay.
I don't know.
Aunt Pitty Pat needs to go back to her plantation.
Right? I just couldn't. The disparity between President Obama shows up to campaign with Raphael Warnock versus Lindsey Graham goes to Georgia to campaign with Herschel Walker. Who knows what madness happened behind the scenes to make that happen. But the fact that Obama's he is on a barnstorm tour to go campaign for people, and that is fabulous. That was his big strength in 2008. That was his big strength in 2012. That is his big strength now.
He also did it in 2018 too. He ran around, doing that. So he actually was helpful in getting us to the point where we had control of all three houses. So,
yeah.
All right.
Excellent.
Does anybody have any final words of wisdom they want to share?
Subscribe to Shudder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not? Gosh, good stuff on there.
All right, folks. Written on the Edges, produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, list stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.roguepodcast.com. We would like to extend a huge, massive thank you to Michael G. Williams for joining us this month to review queer horror films of every type and genre. Please listen to previous episodes, then go buy some of his books, subscribe to his Twitter, follow him. He's highly intelligent, in case you haven't noticed from some of his comments. He can pull things apart that Baz and I missed, so go follow him. It's worth it.
And if Shudder wanted to adapt any of my books, I could make it real cheap.
Right,
Not free, but real cheap.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Seriously, thank you so much for letting me do this. This has been really delightful, and I really loved it. Getting to talk about this stuff with other queer people, it's just something that we don't get to do very often. So it's been a real pleasure.
It has been a joy.
And just like Shudder, we're doing it for ourselves. We make it for the rest of the people out there. Linda's going to be happy that we don't have to have a Linda,
All right, folks. Like, subscribe, get the alerts for new episodes, follow us on YouTube, and tune in next week for your Queer Media Fix.
Hey.
Oh, what's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.